In a quiet, modest town where life moved at a slower pace, there was a small school that stood on the edge of the community. The building was old, its paint peeling and walls cracked from years of wear and neglect. Inside, students hustled through dimly lit hallways, their laughter echoing faintly amidst the scuffed lockers and creaky floors. Among these students was Ethan, a shy 14-year-old boy with a heart full of dreams despite the hardships he faced every day. Ethan lived in a tiny apartment with his mother, who worked tirelessly to provide for them. She cleaned offices during the night and served tables at a diner during the day, often returning home exhausted but always making sure Ethan had what he needed, though sometimes it wasn't much. His clothes were patched-up hand-me-downs and his backpack had more duct tape than fabric holding it together. But none of this mattered to Ethan because he carried something far more valuable within him: hope. Hope came alive for Ethan whenever he stepped into the school's forgotten music room. Tucked away in a corner of the building, the room was rarely used. Dust covered the shelves, and most of the instruments were either broken or out of tune. Yet among the chaos sat an old cello, its wood scratched and its strings frayed but still playable. It was here that Ethan found solace. Every chance he got, during lunch breaks, after school, or even between classes, he would slip into the music room unnoticed and teach himself how to play. He didn't have lessons or formal training. Instead, he relied on videos he watched on his ancient phone. Late at night, when the world around him grew quiet, Ethan would sit cross-legged on his bed, headphones plugged in, listening intently as skilled musicians demonstrated techniques online. Then, the next day, he'd try to replicate those sounds on the cello. At first, his attempts were clumsy, producing squeaks and off-key notes that made him wince. But over time, his fingers learned to dance across the strings, coaxing out melodies that grew sweeter with each passing week. To Ethan, playing the cello wasn't just about creating music, it was an escape. When he held the bow and drew it across the strings, everything else faded away. The worries about money, the teasing from classmates, the feeling of being different, all of it disappeared. In those moments, he felt like he belonged somewhere, even if only to the invisible audience of empty chairs in the music room. But not everyone shared Ethan's love for music. Principal Grayson, a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, ruled the school with an unyielding grip. He believed strongly in discipline and order, prioritizing academics above all else. To him, activities like art and music were frivolous distractions that took away from what truly mattered: grades and test scores. Under his leadership, the school's budget for extracurricular programs had dwindled, leaving rooms like the music room neglected and unused. One afternoon, while making his rounds through the building, Principal Grayson heard faint strains of music coming from down the hall. Curious and slightly irritated, he followed the sound until he reached the music room. Peering inside, he saw Ethan seated on a stool, completely absorbed in his playing. For a moment, Grayson stood frozen, watching the boy's concentration. But then his expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" he barked, startling Ethan so badly that he nearly dropped the cello. Flustered, Ethan stammered an explanation, telling the principal how he loved playing the cello and practiced whenever he could find time. Instead of softening, however, Grayson's face twisted into a sneer. "You think this is more important than your studies?" he asked coldly, gesturing toward the instrument. "Do you honestly believe playing the cello will get you anywhere in life?" Ethan's cheeks flushed red, but he said nothing. He knew arguing wouldn't help, so he simply nodded and began packing up the cello, ready to leave. But Grayson wasn't done. A cruel idea sparked in his mind, an idea that would teach Ethan and perhaps the entire student body a lesson about focusing on what really mattered. Over the next few days, rumors spread throughout the school about an upcoming assembly. No one knew exactly why it was being held, but whispers filled the hallways, speculating whether it was about new rules, disciplinary actions, or something else entirely. On the morning of the assembly, students filed into the auditorium, chatting excitedly as they waited for Principal Grayson to take the stage. Teachers exchanged puzzled glances, unsure what to expect. When the principal finally appeared, He wasn't alone. Trailing behind him was Ethan, clutching the cello awkwardly in front of him. The sight sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Some students recognized Ethan and whispered about how he was always sneaking off to practice. Others snickered, wondering what trouble he might be in. Grayson stepped up to the microphone, his voice booming as he addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're gathered here today to address something I've recently discovered," he began, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It seems some of our students believe that hobbies like playing musical instruments are more valuable than studying hard and achieving academic success." He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Take this young man, for example." He gestured toward Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of hundreds of eyes. "He spends his free time practicing the cello instead of hitting the books. So let's put his so-called talent to the test, shall we? Let's see if it's worth all the effort he's putting into it." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Ethan looked down at the cello in his hands, his heart pounding. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and humiliated. But deep inside, a spark of determination flickered to life. This was his chance, not just to prove himself, but to show everyone that music wasn't just a distraction. It was a part of who he was. As Grayson handed him the bow and signaled for him to begin, Ethan took a shaky breath. Clutching the neck of the cello tightly, he closed his eyes and let his fingers find their place on the strings. And then, with a single stroke of the bow, the silence was shattered. What happened next would change everything for Ethan, for the principal, and for the entire school. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as Ethan stood on stage, the cello resting against his shoulder. His hands trembled slightly, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. The weight of Principal Grayson's words still hung heavy in the air, but something inside Ethan refused to let him back down. He had spent countless hours teaching himself how to play, pouring his heart into every note, and now he found himself standing before the entire school, his peers, his teachers, and the man who had mocked him. Principal Grayson stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression smug and self-assured. To him, this was nothing more than a spectacle, a way to prove his point about prioritizing academics over what he saw as trivial pursuits. But for Ethan, it was so much more. It wasn't just about proving Principal Grayson wrong. It was about showing everyone that music could be powerful, moving, and meaningful, and maybe, just maybe, it was also about proving something to himself. Ethan closed his eyes, blocking out the sea of faces staring at him. He tried to focus on the familiar melodies he had practiced late into the night, the ones that had brought him comfort when life felt overwhelming. Taking a deep breath, he drew the bow across the strings, producing the first soft, resonant note. The sound filled the room, cutting through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. At first, the notes were hesitant, almost shy, as if testing the waters. But then, slowly, they began to build. Each stroke of the bow grew steadier, each note clearer and richer. Ethan played Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, a piece he had painstakingly learned by ear from videos online. What started as tentative plucks transformed into a sweeping melody that seemed to breathe life into the very walls of the auditorium. As Ethan played, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The initial snickers and whispers faded away, replaced by an awestruck silence. Students leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide with wonder. Teachers exchanged glances, some nodding appreciatively while others dabbed at tears forming in the corners of their eyes. Even Principal Grayson, who had intended this moment to humiliate Ethan, found himself transfixed. There was something extraordinary about the performance, not just the technical skill, though Ethan's playing was impressive for someone entirely self-taught, but the emotion behind it. Every note carried a depth of feeling that resonated deeply with everyone listening. It was as if Ethan wasn't simply playing the cello. He was telling a story, sharing pieces of his soul with the audience. The struggles, the loneliness, the hope. All of it came pouring out through the music. By the time Ethan reached the climax of the piece, the energy in the room was electric. The rich, haunting tones of the cello soared, filling every corner of the auditorium. For those few minutes, no one thought about grades or exams or the challenges waiting outside the school doors. All that mattered was the music and the boy creating it. When the final note faded into silence, there was a moment where no one moved or spoke. The room was utterly still, as if everyone was holding their breath, afraid to break the spell. Then, like a dam bursting, the audience erupted into applause. Students jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering wildly. Some whistled, others shouted encouragement, and a few even wiped away tears. The ovation was thunderous, shaking the old wooden beams of the auditorium. Ethan lowered the cello, his face flushed but glowing with pride. He hadn't expected this kind of reaction. When he looked out at the crowd, he saw smiles, nods, and thumbs up from classmates who had once ignored or teased him. Even the teachers who rarely acknowledged his presence were beaming at him now. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly seen. But not everyone shared the joy radiating through the room. Principal Grayson stood frozen, his arms still crossed, tightly over his chest. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. The applause didn't seem to reach him. Instead, he appeared lost in thought, his brow furrowed as if grappling with something unsettling. The smug confidence he had exuded earlier was gone, replaced by an uneasy expression. What had happened? He had planned this assembly to ridicule Ethan, to drive home the message that hobbies like music were distractions from academic success. But somewhere along the way, things had gone terribly wrong. Instead of embarrassing the boy, Grayson had inadvertently given him a platform to shine. Worse yet, the performance had stirred something deep within the principal himself, something he couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. As the applause continued, Grayson glanced around the room. He saw students cheering enthusiastically, teachers wiping away tears, and Ethan standing quietly, looking both proud and humbled. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it must feel like to create something so beautiful, to inspire such raw emotion in others. And then, just as quickly, he pushed the thought aside, reminding himself that he was here to enforce discipline, not indulge in sentimentality. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. As the assembly ended and students filed out of the auditorium, buzzing with excitement, Grayson lingered behind. He watched Ethan carefully pack up the cello, his movements deliberate and careful as though handling something precious. When Ethan finally turned to leave, Grayson called out to him. "Wait," he said, his voice softer than usual. Ethan stopped and turned, his expression wary. That was quite something," Grayson admitted gruffly, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't expect—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Ethan nodded silently, sensing the unspoken apology behind the words. Without saying anything more, he walked away, leaving Grayson alone with his thoughts. Back in his office later that day, Grayson sat at his desk, staring blankly at the piles of paperwork in front of him. Try as he might, he couldn't shake the memory of Ethan's performance. The music had been hauntingly beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It had reminded him of a part of himself he had long buried, a younger version of himself who had once dreamed of becoming a pianist. Years ago, before he became a principal consumed by rules and regulations, Grayson had loved music. He had spent hours practicing scales and chords, imagining a future where he would perform on grand stages. But life had other plans. Financial pressures, societal expectations, and practical concerns had forced him to abandon his dreams. Over time, he convinced himself that music was frivolous, a luxury reserved for those who didn't have real responsibilities. And yet hearing Ethan play had awakened something dormant within him, a longing he had forgotten existed. For the rest of the day, Grayson wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt foolish for underestimating Ethan and misjudging the power of music. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the impact the performance had made, not just on him but on the entire school. By mocking Ethan, he had inadvertently created a moment of unity and inspiration, something he hadn't achieved in years of speeches and disciplinary actions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his office, Grayson made a decision. He wouldn't undo what had happened. That was impossible. But he could choose how to move forward. Perhaps it was time to rethink his approach, not just toward Ethan, but toward the role of creativity and passion in education. After all, if a single cello performance could transform an entire auditorium, what else might be possible? Little did Grayson know, this realization would set off a chain of events that would change not only his own perspective, but the lives of everyone at the school, including Ethan. The days following the assembly were unlike any others in the history of the school. For Ethan, life suddenly felt different, not just because of the newfound attention he was receiving, but because of how people treated him. Students who had once teased him for being quiet or wearing old clothes now approached him with genuine curiosity and respect. Some asked about the cello and whether he could teach them to play. Others simply wanted to talk, eager to learn more about the boy, who had stunned everyone with his talent. Teachers, too, began acknowledging him more often, offering words of encouragement and even asking if he'd consider performing at upcoming school events. Ethan didn't know how to feel about all the changes. On one hand, it was nice to be noticed and appreciated after years of blending into the background. But on the other hand, he worried that the attention might fade as quickly as it had come. He couldn't help but wonder if people truly cared about him, or if they were just fascinated by the novelty of his performance. Still, he tried to stay humble and focused, continuing to practice the cello whenever he could find time. Meanwhile, Principal Grayson wrestled with his own thoughts. The image of Ethan standing on stage, bowing to thunderous applause, replayed in his mind over and over again. It wasn't just the music that haunted him. It was the way the entire room had transformed during those few minutes. The students, usually restless and distracted, had been completely captivated. Even the teachers, many of whom rarely showed much enthusiasm, had been visibly moved. For a brief moment, the school had felt alive in a way Grayson hadn't experienced in years. But what troubled him most was the realization that he had almost ruined it all. His original intention, to humiliate Ethan, now seemed cruel and short-sighted. Instead of inspiring discipline and focus, his actions had nearly crushed a young boy's spirit. And yet, somehow, Ethan had risen above it, turning humiliation into triumph. That thought gnawed at Grayson, forcing him to confront parts of himself he'd rather forget. That evening, unable to sleep, Grayson found himself sitting in his dimly lit living room, staring at an old photograph on the mantel. In it, a much younger version of himself sat at a piano, smiling confidently as his fingers hovered over the keys. Back then, he had dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, spending hours practicing scales and perfecting pieces by composers like Chopin and Debussy. Music had been his escape, his passion, his identity. But somewhere along the way, life had intervened. Financial struggles, societal expectations, and the pressure to pursue a practical career had pushed those dreams aside. Over time, he had convinced himself that music was frivolous, a luxury reserved for those without real responsibilities. Looking at the photo now, Grayson felt a pang of regret. He realized that in discouraging students like Ethan from pursuing their passions, he was perpetuating the same mindset that had robbed him of his own dreams. Wasn't education supposed to inspire and uplift? Shouldn't schools nurture creativity alongside academics? These questions swirled in his mind, leaving him restless and uneasy. The next morning, Grayson arrived at school earlier than usual. As he walked through the empty hallways, he paused outside the music room. Pushing open the door, he stepped inside and surveyed the space. Dust covered the shelves, and broken instruments lay scattered around the room. It was clear that this part of the school had been neglected for far too long. Yet, despite its disrepair, the room still held potential, a reminder that even the most forgotten corners could be revived with care and effort. Grayson sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. He knew what he had to do. Returning to his office, he began drafting plans to revitalize the school's arts program. First, he reached out to local businesses, explaining the importance of fostering creativity in education and asking for donations to repair instruments and purchase new ones. To his surprise, several companies agreed to contribute, citing the positive impact such initiatives could have on the community. Next, Grayson hired Mrs. Harper, a retired music teacher who lived nearby, to lead weekly workshops for interested students. Her warm demeanor and extensive experience made her the perfect choice to guide budding musicians like Ethan. Finally, he announced monthly talent showcases where students could perform in front of their peers, giving them a platform to express themselves creatively. When Ethan heard about these changes, he was astonished. At first, he assumed it was some kind of mistake. Principal Grayson had always been strict and dismissive of anything unrelated to academics. But when Grayson personally invited him to join the newly formed music club, Ethan couldn't believe it. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan asked hesitantly during their meeting in the principal's office. Grayson leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Because I was wrong," he admitted, his voice steady but sincere. "I underestimated you, Ethan, and I underestimated the power of music. What you did on that stage reminded me of something I lost touch with a long time ago. I don't want other students to lose sight of their passions the way I did." Ethan nodded slowly, sensing the honesty in Grayson's words. Though he still harbored some lingering resentment, he decided to give the principal the benefit of the doubt. After all, actions spoke louder than words, and Grayson's efforts to support the arts seemed genuine. As weeks turned into months, the school underwent a remarkable transformation. The music room became a hub of activity, filled with laughter and melodies instead of dust and silence. Students gathered there during breaks, experimenting with instruments and collaborating on projects. Even those who weren't musically inclined found joy in watching performances and cheering on their classmates. Ethan thrived in this new environment. With access to better resources and guidance from Mrs. Harper, his skills improved rapidly. He began composing his own pieces, blending classical techniques with modern influences to create something uniquely his own. His confidence grew, not just as a musician, but as a person. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, and that sense of belonging gave him the courage to dream bigger. Principal Grayson also changed in subtle but significant ways. He became less rigid, more approachable. Teachers noticed that he smiled more often and took a genuine interest in student activities beyond academics. During assemblies, he encouraged creativity and praised students for their achievements in art, drama, and music. Slowly but surely, the school culture shifted, becoming more inclusive and supportive. One day, as Ethan practiced in the music room, Grayson stopped by to listen. When Ethan finished playing, the principal clapped softly, a look of admiration on his face. "You're incredibly talented," he said. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Ethan smiled, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, sir. And thank you for believing in us." Grayson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's never too late to start believing in yourself either," he replied quietly, almost to himself. In that moment, both Ethan and Grayson understood that they were on a journey, not just toward success, but toward rediscovering the things that truly mattered. For Ethan, it was music and self-expression. For Grayson, it was learning to embrace compassion and creativity, qualities he had once dismissed but now recognized as essential. Little did they know this journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and uncertainty. But together they had already begun to lay the foundation for something extraordinary, a legacy of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of art. As the months passed, the changes at the school continued to take root, transforming not just the building itself, but the spirit of everyone within it. The once dusty music room was now a vibrant space filled with life and energy. Instruments that had been broken or forgotten were repaired and polished, gleaming under the soft glow of new lights installed in the ceiling. Posters of famous musicians and composers adorned the walls, inspiring students who walked in to dream bigger and reach further. Ethan became the heart of this transformation. His dedication to the cello inspired others to explore their own talents. Some students picked up guitars while others tried their hand at drums or keyboards. Even those who weren't musically inclined found ways to contribute, designing flyers for performances, helping organize events, or simply cheering on their peers during practice sessions. The sense of community grew stronger with each passing day, and the school began to feel less like a place of rigid rules and more like a home where creativity flourished. Principal Grayson's role in all of this didn't go unnoticed. While he still maintained order and discipline, his approach softened significantly. He started attending rehearsals and performances, sitting quietly in the back of the room and observing with genuine interest. Teachers joked that they barely recognized him anymore. He smiled more often, engaged with students in meaningful conversations, and even joined in on some casual jam sessions when encouraged, though his piano skills were admittedly rusty. Despite these positive changes, however, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the shift toward arts education as enthusiastically as others. A few parents complained, arguing that time spent on music should be redirected toward academics. One particularly vocal critic was Mrs. Peterson, the mother of a top-performing student named Liam. She believed her son's success was due entirely to strict focus on studies and worried that distractions like music clubs would hinder academic achievement. Her concerns came to a head during a parent-teacher meeting. "I understand the importance of well-rounded education," she said sharply, addressing Principal Grayson in front of a small group of attendees. "But we can't afford to let our children waste time on frivolous activities. They need to focus on what will get them into good colleges, not hobbies." The room fell silent, tension hanging thick in the air. All eyes turned to Grayson, waiting to see how he would respond. For a moment he hesitated, recalling the doubts he himself had harbored about music before Ethan's performance changed his perspective. Then, clearing his throat, he spoke calmly but firmly. "Mrs. Peterson, I respect your concerns, and I agree that academics are crucial," he began. "But I also believe that creativity and passion play an equally important role in shaping young minds. Music isn't just a hobby, it's a form of expression, a way to build confidence, and even a tool for learning discipline and perseverance. Look at Ethan, for example. Since joining the music program, his grades have improved and he's become a leader among his peers. Far from distracting him, music has motivated him to excel in every area of his life." Mrs. Peterson frowned, but didn't argue further. Though skeptical, she couldn't deny the evidence Grayson presented. Over time, as more students demonstrated similar growth, both academically and personally, even the most resistant critics began to soften their stance. The proof was undeniable. Integrating arts into education wasn't a distraction. It was an enhancement. For Ethan, the growing support meant opportunities he never imagined. With Mrs. Harper's guidance, he entered a regional music competition hosted by a prestigious conservatory. The idea terrified him at first. He had always played for himself or small audiences, never imagining stepping onto such a grand stage. But encouragement from his teachers, classmates, and even Principal Grayson gave him the courage to try. Preparing for the competition required countless hours of practice. Ethan spent late nights perfecting his technique, often staying in the music room until the janitor gently reminded him it was time to go home. Despite the exhaustion, he felt alive in a way he never had before. Each note he played carried not only his hard work, but also the hopes and dreams of everyone who believed in him. On the day of the competition, Ethan arrived at the conservatory feeling both excited and nervous. The auditorium was massive, its high ceilings adorned with intricate carvings and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Contestants from across the region gathered backstage, tuning instruments and rehearsing last-minute adjustments. Ethan recognized some familiar faces, other students from neighboring schools, but most were strangers whose polished appearances and confident demeanors intimidated him. When his turn came, Ethan walked onto the stage, clutching the cello tightly. The spotlight blinded him momentarily, and the sea of faces in the audience blurred together. His heart raced, threatening to drown out the music in his mind. But then, as he sat down and placed the bow against the strings, everything else faded away. Just like in the school auditorium months earlier, he closed his eyes and let the music guide him. What followed was nothing short of magical. Ethan poured his soul into the performance, playing a piece he had composed himself, a blend of classical influences and personal experiences. The melody told the story of his journey, the struggles, the triumphs, and the people who had supported him along the way. When the final note resonated through the hall, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience erupted into applause. Though Ethan didn't win first place, he received a standing ovation and special recognition for his original composition. Judges praised his technical skill and emotional depth, calling him a true artist. As he accepted the award, tears welled up in his eyes, not because he hadn't won, but because he realized how far he'd come. From being mocked on stage to earning accolades at a prestigious event, his journey was a testament to resilience and belief in oneself. Back at school, news of Ethan's success spread quickly, sparking even greater enthusiasm for the arts program. Students rallied around him, celebrating his achievement as a victory for the entire community. Principal Grayson beamed with pride, knowing that the boy he had once underestimated had grown into someone extraordinary. But perhaps the most profound impact of Ethan's journey was on Grayson himself. Witnessing the ripple effect of his decision to embrace creativity reinforced his belief in the power of second chances, not just for students, but for himself. He began taking piano lessons again, rediscovering the joy he had abandoned years ago. Sometimes, after hours, he could be found in the music room, tentatively practicing scales while Ethan offered pointers with a grin. Through it all, one thing became clear. The changes at the school weren't just about music or art. They were about connection. By fostering an environment where students felt valued and encouraged to pursue their passions, Grayson had created something far greater than improved test scores or shiny trophies. He had built a community united by shared dreams and mutual respect. And yet, despite the progress made, the story was far from over. Challenges lay ahead, as they always do, but the foundation had been laid. Together, Ethan, Grayson, and the rest of the school had proven that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with a single note, or a single act of courage. As the school year drew to a close, the transformation that had begun with Ethan's unforgettable performance reached its peak. The once neglected music program was now thriving, and the entire school community felt the ripple effects of this change. Students who had never considered themselves creative were discovering hidden talents, while those like Ethan, who had always loved music, found new confidence and purpose. Even Principal Grayson, once a staunch advocate for rigid academic focus, had become a champion of the arts, inspiring teachers and students alike to embrace a more holistic approach to education. Ethan's success at the regional competition had ignited a spark in the school. More students began signing up for music lessons, eager to follow in his footsteps. Mrs. Harper, the retired music teacher, was thrilled by the surge of interest and worked tirelessly to nurture each student's unique abilities. She introduced them to different genres, from classical symphonies to contemporary pop, encouraging experimentation and self-expression. Some students formed small bands, practicing during lunch breaks or after school, while others collaborated on original compositions. The music room buzzed with activity, laughter, and the sound of instruments blending together in harmony. Principal Grayson played an active role in supporting these efforts. He secured additional funding from local businesses and alumni, ensuring that every student had access to quality instruments and resources. He also organized a grand end-of-year showcase, inviting parents, community members, and even representatives from nearby colleges to attend. It was meant to be more than just a performance. It was an opportunity to celebrate how far the school had come and to inspire future generations. The weeks leading up to the showcase were filled with excitement and hard work. Students rehearsed tirelessly, determined to make their performances memorable. Ethan took on a leadership role, mentoring younger students and helping coordinate logistics for the event. Though he still practiced daily for his own piece, he made time to assist others, sharing tips and offering encouragement. His humility and kindness earned him respect not only from his peers but also from the faculty. Behind the scenes, Grayson juggled countless responsibilities to ensure everything ran smoothly. From arranging seating charts to overseeing technical setups, he immersed himself in the details. At first, some teachers teased him about his newfound involvement, joking that he'd traded his clipboard for a conductor's baton. But deep down, they admired his dedication and saw how much he cared about making the showcase a success. On the night of the event, the auditorium was packed. Parents filled the rows, cameras ready to capture every moment. Local reporters sat near the front, notebooks in hand, curious to see what all the buzz was about. Outside, strings of fairy lights illuminated the entrance, giving the school a festive atmosphere. Inside, posters displayed artwork created by students alongside bios of the performers. The air hummed with anticipation. The showcase opened with a rousing ensemble performance featuring over 20 students playing a mix of percussion, strings, and wind instruments. Their energy set the tone for the evening, drawing loud cheers from the audience. As the program progressed, each act brought something unique to the stage: a soulful violin solo, a jazz quartet improvising effortlessly, and even a rap duo delivering clever lyrics about overcoming obstacles. Every performance received enthusiastic applause, but it was clear that everyone was waiting for one person: Ethan. When Ethan finally stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Clutching his cello, he scanned the crowd, spotting his mother seated near the front, her eyes glistening with pride. Beside her sat Principal Grayson, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began to play. His piece was unlike anything he had performed before. It was deeply personal, weaving together moments from his life: the struggles of growing up poor, the loneliness of being misunderstood, the joy of finding his voice through music, and the gratitude he felt toward those who had supported him along the way. Each note carried raw emotion, resonating with everyone in the room. When he reached the final crescendo, the audience erupted into applause, standing as one to honor his brilliance. After the showcase, the celebrations spilled out into the courtyard, where refreshments awaited. Students mingled with their families, basking in the glow of accomplishment. Teachers congratulated one another, marveling at how much the school had transformed in such a short time. Reporters interviewed Ethan and several other performers, capturing stories of perseverance and passion that would later appear in local newspapers. But perhaps the most poignant moment came when Grayson approached Ethan near the end of the evening. Holding a small trophy engraved with the words "Outstanding Musical Achievement," he handed it to the young musician with a smile. "You've done something remarkable here tonight," Grayson said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone in this school. You've reminded us all what it means to believe in ourselves and support one another." Ethan accepted the trophy, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, sir," he replied softly. "But I couldn't have done any of this without your help or without the support of everyone else here." Grayson shook his head, brushing off the praise. "No, Ethan, this is your victory. You earned it, and I hope you know that this is just the beginning for you. There's no limit to what you can achieve if you keep following your dreams." For a moment, the two simply stood there, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and celebration. In that quiet exchange, both understood how much they had grown, not just individually, but together. Ethan had taught Grayson the value of creativity and compassion, while Grayson had given Ethan the confidence to pursue his passion despite adversity. Their bond, forged through mutual respect and shared experiences, symbolized the larger transformation taking place within the school. As the night wound down, Ethan lingered outside, gazing up at the stars. His mind raced with thoughts of the future. With his talent and determination, scholarships to prestigious conservatories seemed within reach. Yet as exciting as those possibilities were, he knew they weren't the only thing driving him. What truly mattered was the impact he could continue to have on his peers, on his community, and on anyone who doubted their ability to rise above challenges. Inside the school, Grayson stood alone in his office, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought about the boy he had mocked on stage months earlier, the same boy who had now become a beacon of hope and inspiration. He realized that redemption wasn't about erasing past mistakes. It was about learning from them and using those lessons to create something meaningful. Looking around the room, Grayson noticed the photograph of his younger self at the piano sitting on the mantel. For so long, it had been a painful reminder of dreams abandoned, but now it felt different, as if it represented not failure, but possibility. Maybe it wasn't too late to chase those dreams again, to rediscover the joy he had once known. Inspired by Ethan's courage, Grayson resolved to take small steps toward reclaiming his love for music, starting with regular practice sessions in the revitalized music room. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of the school, both Ethan and Grayson walked the halls with renewed purpose. They knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But they also knew that they weren't alone. Together, they had proven that change was possible, that second chances mattered, and that the power of belief could transform lives in ways no one expected. And so as the final bell rang, signaling the end of another school year, the echoes of music and laughter lingered in the air, a testament to the extraordinary journey that had unfolded within these walls. The story of Ethan and Principal Grayson was far from over, but it had already become a legend in the making, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest victories are born from the smallest acts of courage and kindness. Years passed, and the small school on the edge of town continued to thrive in ways no one could have imagined. The arts program, once a neglected corner of the building, had become its beating heart, a source of pride for students, teachers, and the entire community. What had started as a single cello performance had blossomed into something far greater, a movement that celebrated creativity, resilience, and the power of believing in oneself. Ethan, now a young man with dreams bigger than ever, stood at the center of this transformation. After graduating at the top of his class, he earned a full scholarship to a prestigious conservatory, where he honed his skills under the guidance of world-renowned musicians. His original compositions gained recognition not just locally, but internationally, earning him invitations to perform on stages across the globe. Yet despite his growing fame, Ethan never forgot where it all began: the dusty music room, the worn-out cello, and the principal who had unintentionally given him a platform to shine. Principal Grayson, too, underwent a profound personal evolution. The man who had once dismissed music as a frivolous distraction became one of its most passionate advocates. He continued to lead the school with discipline and care, but his leadership style softened further, emphasizing empathy and encouragement over rigid rules. Under his watch, the arts flourished, not just music, but drama, visual arts, and creative writing as well. Students learned that success wasn't defined solely by grades or test scores. It was also about finding joy, expressing themselves, and contributing positively to the world around them. Grayson's own journey of rediscovery played a significant role in this shift. Inspired by Ethan's courage and talent, he rekindled his love for the piano. At first, he practiced quietly in the evenings, hesitant to share his progress with anyone. But over time, he grew more confident, even joining informal jam sessions with students during lunch breaks. Watching him laugh and play alongside teenagers half his age became a common sight, and it endeared him to everyone in the school. The bond between Ethan and Grayson remained strong, even as their paths diverged. Ethan often returned to visit during holidays, bringing stories of his travels and performances. On one such visit, he was invited to give a motivational speech to the current students. Standing on the same stage where he had once been mocked, Ethan felt a surge of emotion as he looked out at the sea of eager faces. "I'm not here to tell you that life will always be easy," Ethan began, his voice steady but warm. "There will be times when people doubt you, when circumstances seem impossible, and when you question whether your efforts are worth it. But I'm living proof that perseverance pays off, and so are each of you." He paused, glancing toward the front row where Grayson sat listening intently. "When I was standing here years ago, playing my cello for the first time in front of everyone, I didn't know what would happen next. I was scared, unsure if anyone would understand why music meant so much to me. But then something amazing happened. People listened. They didn't just hear the notes, they felt them, and because of that, they believed in me. Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening with gratitude. That belief changed everything for me. It gave me the confidence to dream bigger and work harder. So today I want to remind you that your passions matter. Whether it's music, art, sports, science, or anything else that sets your soul on fire, don't let anyone tell you it's not important. Because when we support each other's dreams, incredible things can happen. The auditorium erupted into applause, and Ethan stepped down from the stage, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. As he approached Grayson after the event, the principal rose from his seat, extending a hand. But instead of shaking it, Ethan pulled him into a heartfelt hug. "Thank you," Ethan said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Grayson nodded, his own eyes misty. "No, Ethan, thank you. You reminded me of what truly matters." In the years that followed, the legacy of Ethan and Grayson's story spread far beyond the walls of the school. Local newspapers wrote articles about the unlikely partnership that had transformed an underfunded institution into a beacon of creativity and hope. Alumni credited the arts program with helping them discover their potential, while parents praised the school for fostering well-rounded individuals prepared to face life's challenges. Even Mrs. Peterson, the skeptical mother who had once questioned the value of music education, admitted she had been wrong. Her son Liam, inspired by Ethan's example, joined the school band and discovered a love for drumming that boosted his confidence and improved his focus in academics. When she attended her son's first concert, tears streamed down her face as she realized how much music had enriched his life. As for Grayson, he eventually retired from his position as principal, leaving behind a school unrecognizable from the one he had inherited. His final act as leader was to establish a scholarship fund in Ethan's name, ensuring that future generations of students would have access to opportunities regardless of their financial circumstances. During the ceremony marking his retirement, Grayson delivered a speech that moved many to tears. "When I first met Ethan," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I thought I was teaching him a lesson. Instead, he taught me one of the most important lessons of my life, that passion and creativity are not distractions, they are essential. They remind us of our humanity, connect us to one another, and give us the strength to overcome adversity." Looking out at the audience, which included former students, colleagues, and friends, Grayson concluded, "This school is a testament to what happens when we dare to believe in each other. Let's continue to nurture that spirit, not just here, but everywhere we go." Years later, Ethan found himself back in the auditorium, this time as a guest performer for the annual showcase. Now a celebrated musician, he had traveled the world, sharing his gift with audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Yet nothing compared to the feeling of stepping onto this familiar stage, surrounded by the people who had shaped his journey. As he played his final piece, a hauntingly beautiful melody inspired by his childhood struggles and triumphs, the room fell silent. Every note carried the weight of his experiences, echoing the emotions that had driven him forward through every challenge. When the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering with overwhelming enthusiasm. Among the crowd was Grayson, now older but still vibrant, his eyes shining with pride. As Ethan bowed, he caught sight of the former principal and smiled warmly. In that moment, they both knew that their story was complete, not because it had ended, but because it had come full circle. After the performance, Ethan walked off stage to find Grayson waiting for him. Without saying a word, the two embraced, neither needing to speak to convey the depth of their gratitude and admiration. Together they had proven that second chances, courage, and belief in one another could transform lives in ways no one could predict. And so, as the curtain closed on another successful showcase, the echoes of music and laughter lingered in the air, a reminder of the extraordinary journey that had unfolded within these walls. The story of Ethan and Principal Grayson had become a legend, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of redemption, resilience, and the transformative magic of art. Though their paths would continue to evolve, their bond remained unbreakable, a symbol of hope and possibility that would inspire countless others for years to come.